Good evening. This is Pastor Mike. We're here for another Investment in Truth review. And I'm Pastor Mike Benjamins Jr. of Southern Oregon, of the Remnant Church here in Southern Oregon. And tonight what we're going to be talking about is the smoke and mirrors shell game. The incremental encroachment of inherent rights and inalienable rights, and moving the bar. And I know you probably don't know what moving the bar means, but we're going to get into that. The code number assigned to this particular recording will be code 2019V for video 0009. The date today is March 7th, 2019. Okay, now let me just give you a little glimpse of what we're going to be talking about tonight before I get into the disclaimers. We're going to be talking about classification, codification, categorization, and definitions, as well as fees, licenses, and permits that can be used to encroach upon your inherent and inalienable rights. Now, it may sound kind of dry, it may sound kind of uninteresting, but believe it or not, it's more interesting and more important than you might imagine. And just hear me out. Somebody, I always envision when I'm doing one of these, somebody will say, oh my God, he's going to talk about classification, codification, categorization, and definition. This is dry, I'm out of here. Not a good idea. You need to figure out why I'm taking the trouble to even talk about this. These are things you may not have thought about, but we're going to address them because they are important. Okay, let's get into the disclaimers that I always have to read. We'll get that out of the way. The information provided herein is for educational, truth, and knowledge purposes only. No specific course of action is directed, which means I'm not telling you to do any particular thing, except the advancement of knowledge and truth. I now state and clearly declare that I am addressing the subject matter set forth herein as a pastor of God in my religious and ecclesiastical capacity and office, and that I am exercising my official function to keep religious believers informed of their various rights, freedoms, and liberty under God, and relative to their awareness and understanding of the various laws of man. Therefore, I hereby declare, claim, and assert any and all religious protections of whatsoever nature and kind, including protection from discrimination on the basis of religion, available under the inherent, inalienable, primary, and subordinate rights and laws. The Remnant Church here in Southern Oregon, Mike Benjamins Jr., a pastor, in both his personal and ecclesiastical capacities, including his subordinates and personnel, individually and jointly, disclaim any and all liability and or responsibility for any damages sustained or suffered by the readers, viewers, or other entities in the implementation of the teaching set forth in this video or treatise, because I use this for both treatises and video. The material is provided as a research study project for learning purposes only, and any implementations and or applications contrary to my various cautionary statements, which I make from time to time, are undertaken at the sole risk and peril of such readers, viewers, or entities. No statement is made or implied as to the ultimate outcome resulting from such implementations or applications. Okay, that's the end of the disclaimer. Now we're gonna spend some time here explaining what we're talking about here. We're going to get into a little bit of definitions of what these things mean. The first category is classify, classification, and reclassification. Second category is codify, codification, and recodification. Third category is define, definition, set the meaning of, and redefinition. The fourth category is categorize, category, categorization, and recategorization. Okay, so Basically, what we're covering is class, code, definition, and category. Let me say that again. Class, code, definition, and category. Let's start with class. Class, to set, group, or configure. A division based on quality, rank, or grade. Can be a social stratum. Social rank or class based upon cultural or shared characteristics. Classification is the act or result of classifying into a group, category, or class, as well as relationships between them. Classified, arranged in classes or categories. Available to authorized personnel only as for security purposes. As they say sometimes, it's classified, meaning that it's available to authorized persons only. Classify, to arrange or organize by class or category. To designate as confidential or secret. If you classify something, again, it's classified, it's confidential or secret. Reclassification. This is important. Most of the time when I'll be talking tonight, I'll be talking about the dangers and the pitfalls of reclassification and redoing things. Reclassification, to reset, regroup, or reconfigure. To move to a different division based upon quality, rank, or grade. To assign to a different group, category, or class. Okay, that pretty much covers classes and classifying and reclassification, what they kind of mean. Now let's go to category. A specifically defined division in a system of classification or class. A general class of ideas, terms, or things that mark divisions or coordinations within a conceptual scheme. Categorical, being without exception or qualification, absolute, as if when somebody says, I categorically deny. Categorically deny. Of or relating to a category or categories. This is the other meaning. So categorical can mean relating to a category or categories. More general meaning, according to or using categories. Recategorization, to alter or modify the division or category something belongs in. Code, a systematically arranged or comprehensive collection of laws. A systematic collection of regulations and rules of procedure or conduct, like a traffic code, criminal code, or civil code. A system of symbols, letters, or words given certain arbitrary meanings used for messages requiring secrecy or brevity. Codify, to reduce to a code, as in codifying laws. To arrange or systemize, as in here, I mentioned before in one of my videos, I said ORS 9.160 means that this law has been codified under that designation in numerals. Codification and recodification. It can be used as a way to keep others from knowing what is being addressed, planned, carried out, or applied. So we're going to get into that, but when you recodify something, it may be harder to find, and you might have to cross-reference and all that kind of stuff. In relation to that, let me talk for a minute now before I get into definitions. Originally, the Patriot Act, which by the way largely circumvents the U.S. Constitution and is therefore unconstitutional in large part, was about 2,500 pages when it was first passed. Through subsequent modification and addition, largely by a bureaucratic process, it grew to over 10,000 pages. That's the Patriot Act. A lot of you already know what the term Patriot Act means. Now you have to realize, when you pass an act like that and it's 2,500 pages, first of all, I doubt very much if the people who passed it actually read all the 2,500 pages. I would say they didn't. But anyway, the point is 2,500 pages is a lot of reading. But after it was passed, and then everybody said, okay, well, it's 2,500 pages. We passed it. We don't know everything that's in there, but we passed it. But thereafter, it grew to over 10,000 pages. And that's a problem because it gets complicated when you have that many pages of any kind of a law. I would surmise that many of the people who are supposed to know all that it contains do not know all that it can be applied to. It requires the necessity of cross-referencing with the U.S. Code as you go through it. This means that it's complicated enough. Not only is it lots of pages, but it isn't just like reading a novel or something and everything's right there and you can just read from the first page to the last page. You've got to have the Patriot Act sitting next to the U.S. Code because it's highly cross-referenced. And you won't be able to know exactly what's going on in the Patriot Act unless you cross-reference it with with the U.S. Code, because it'll reference that. So just to figure out what's going on in that act is not going to be easy. All right. Let's see. We can, I believe, say that it makes an end run around the U.S. Constitution. Yes, I would definitely say that. It does make an end run around the U.S. Constitution. We must hold our government to the law of the land and not be swayed with constant claims that rights must be sacrificed in exchange for promises of security. There is validity to the assertion that those who exchange rights for security will lose both. All right, let's move on now to define, definition, definitive, and redefinition. Define, to state with precise meaning of a word, for example, creating in writing or other media a definition. To describe the nature of or basic qualities of. To delineate the outline or form of. To specify distinctly. To give form or meaning to characterize. Now, we are usually used to the idea that define means to just say what a word means, which we'll get into in definition. The next one is definition. A statement conveying fundamental character. A statement of the meaning of a word, phrase, or term. The act or process of stating a precise meaning or significance, or a formulation of a meaning. The act of making clear and distinct. A state of being closely outlined or determined. Basically, when you're talking about definitions defined, you're talking about the meaning of something. Definitive. Precisely defined or explicit. Supplying or being a final settlement or decision, conclusive, authoritative, and complete. So if you say we have a definitive answer, it's authoritative and complete. Redefinition, to alter or move the definition or in whole or part. So what you're doing is you're changing the meaning and application of something in whole or part. Okay, let's go on here. You may well ask, how will such things as reclassification, recategorization, recodification, and redefinition result in the incremental encroachment of our inherent and inalienable rights? Well, that's what we are here to talk about. Okay. One wise person once said, if you give me unfettered powers to reclassify, recategorize, recodify, and redefine, in time I will control and rule the world. And that sounds far-fetched maybe to you. Say, well, you mean if somebody's got the power to reclassify things, recategorize things, recodify things, and redefine things, in time he'll be able to rule the world? Well, yeah, you can. It may take a little bit of time to do it, but yes, if you've got that kind of unfettered power, that is awesome power. It's awesome power. And I can tell you that the government uses that power quite frequently, those powers. Not to say that some reclassification, recategorization, recodification, and redefinition engaged in when truly necessary and in a benign manner is harmful. No. But when powerful people strive to use it to increase their powers and simultaneously reduce and diminish the rights, freedom, and liberty of the people, it is, without doubt, harmful. It violates the very notion that we are all created upon equal terms, as well as the doctrine that the sovereign people created the government to protect their rights, freedom, and liberty. Let me read that again. You know, I've said it before, but I think it's worth repeating. It violates the very notion that we are all created upon equal terms, as well as the doctrine that the sovereign people created the government to protect their rights, freedom, and liberty. See, that's why the people actually have government, is to protect them in different ways, from war, of course, from invasion and from attack from other countries, but also to protect our rights, freedom, and liberty. Those are the things that we created government to do, not to take away those rights, freedom, and liberties. Reclassification. Let's see if I missed anything. Nope. Okay, reclassification. Let's talk about the inherent right of self-protection as an example. As I have repeatedly taught, our inherent right of self-protection and by the keeping and bearing of arms does not come from the Second Amendment. It is not a constitutional right which flows from the U.S. Constitution. It is an inherent right, inherent and inalienable right that pre-exists the state government, the U.S. Constitution, and the federal government itself. The Second Amendment simply bars the government from infringing an inherent right that the people already had. Now I'm going to go off to this is my two-part treatise on the right to keep and bear arms. I'm going to read here so that you know, so you make a connection here with what I just read. This is confirmed in the case of United States versus Cruikshank. It's an 1875 case, cited as 92 U.S. 542, 23 Lawyers Edition 588. And this is where the Supreme Court famously stated, now listen carefully to what I read here, "The right to bear arms is not granted by the Constitution. Neither is it in any manner dependent upon that instrument for its existence. The Second Amendment means no more than that it shall not be infringed by Congress, and has no other effect than to restrict the powers of the national government." Now, of course, at the time that this was said, it says that it restricts Congress, which, of course, leaves the states out of that at that time. Then it wouldn't have applied to the states yet. So you may well ask, when did it apply to the states then? Well, that came very recently. It actually became applied to the states by the doctrine of incremental incorporation of the Bill of Rights upon the states. And that happened in the case of McDonald versus Chicago in 2010 in a 5-4 decision cited as 561 U.S. 742. Now, that means that this same bar that was on Congress not to infringe our right to keep and bear arms now applies to the states since 2010. That's what it means. Now, you may be wondering, a lot of people do, you may be wondering, well, you mean it didn't all that time from 1875 and from when the Second Amendment was ratified, it didn't apply to the states until 2010? That's correct. It didn't. And you may have thought that it did, but it did not. I'm here to tell you that it did not. Also, that this statement here from Cruikshank, it's what they call a SCOTUS statement, which SCOTUS just means Supreme Court of the United States. You've probably heard POTUS means President of the United States. Well, this is a SCOTUS statement. It means that the Supreme Court actually uttered these words. So that's important. Okay, so I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know that those cases apply to this. If, for example, the government could convince the people that if a person is convicted of a felony, then they could be forever deprived of their right to protect themselves by the keeping and bearing of arms. On its surface, many people would hastily conclude such a thing reasonable. But, my friends and brethren, then one would only need to move and lower the bar of what constitutes a felony. See, once you let that go by and you say, okay, if somebody commits a felony, they're going to lose forever their right to keep and bear arms and protect themselves. They're not just going to lose it for a span of time. They're not just going to lose it for the time that they're serving their sentence. When their sentence is over and they've paid their debt to society, they still can't have any firearms and bear or keep arms after that. Okay, well, a lot of people may think that that's a good idea, but I'm here to tell you that that is not a good idea. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why it is not a good idea. Okay. All right, let me talk a little bit about, let's say that the government reclassifies and moves the bar, as I say, and to what's a felony. And how do they do that? What do they use? They can reclassify something as a felony that wasn't a felony before. That's the power of reclassification. They can recodify it into the felony code. And now I told you, this power of reclassification, redefinition, and recodification is a very powerful thing to have. They can recategorize it and group it into the felonies. And, when you have that power, you can move things into the felony category and class, and, things that aren't actually felonies. Now, just to give you an idea, when I was first going through legal studies and stuff like that, this is how it was put down. Anything that any offense, criminal offense, let's say, that you served less than a year for was considered a misdemeanor. If you did something criminal that you could be incarcerated for more than a year, that would be a felony. But that's a very general application of the idea. That was the original idea. That's completely changed now. Now there are things that are classified as felonies, which before weren't felonies. And not only can they permanently take away your right to keep and bear arms, they can do things like take away your pension. They can do all kinds of things to you because you've been convicted of a felony. The power to move offenses from category to category and reclassify them, recodify them, make them felony is a very, very powerful tool to have if you want to. I think you can already see how that can be used as another avenue to take your gun rights away, to take your right to protect yourself by the keeping and bearing of arms away. All right, let me read this next thing that I wrote because I think that you need to hear it. Like and don't like is not the measuring stick of justice, nor is it the measuring stick of God's truth. For if we can permanently deprive a person who has paid their debt to society of their inherent and inalienable rights, then it can be done to us all, for a vast and expanding variety of reasons. Like and don't like have nothing to do with it. I want you to think back to the Old West, when they, took a person who committed a criminal offense and they put him in territorial prison, let's say. And I actually saw this in movies, and it actually did happen in the Old West. And he served his sentence in this prison, this territorial prison. And then on a certain day, they released him because he'd served his sentence. He'd served his debt to society. They didn't tell him, you can never have a gun again. They would actually, if he had a gun when he was incarcerated, when they released him at the gate of the prison, they would actually hand him back his gun, and off he went on his way. And he was able to protect himself again. Now, you may not like it that something like that might happen. You may not like it that a criminal gets off because of defects in the way that the evidence was gathered, and there goes the criminal walking right out the door. You say, I don't like that. I want them to do away with I don't know why that happened, but I don't want it to happen again. Well, see, what you're not understanding is, and what you need to really focus on is, if they can use unconstitutional evidence to convict somebody and not let them walk, then they can do it to us all. And it's more important that they can't do it to us all than it is to let a few criminals go because the police messed up the gathering of the evidence, or the wasn't gathered right, wasn't obtained right, now it's unconstitutional, now the person walks. The same is true of this idea of taking somebody's gun rights away forever. You see, now that may sound beautiful to you at first, and you can say, yeah, that was a bad guy, and we don't want him to have a gun ever again. We don't even want to have a picture of a gun. We don't even want to have a picture of a bullet. That's how strongly we feel about it. But let me explain to you. Once the government has tasted the power of being able to do that, they can do it to all of us, and in different and varying ways. And that's what you better think about. That's what you better think about very, very hard. All right, let's move on. Now that you've been duly amused by Pastor Mike on that subject, one could similarly modify what constitutes an offense. Now we're getting into reclassifying and redefining what words mean. So we're talking about what if they similarly modify what constitutes an offense. First, they moved up and down what a felony was, mostly down. Now we're going to start playing with what offense means. We have seen some of this happening already in the area of free speech, where some previously lawful speech has been reclassified as hate speech. See, they're moving things around. They're saying, well, something that you were able to say before, now you can't say. Now it's hate speech. You see, they're sliding the bar on you. Now, if you like that, well, I don't know what to tell you. I don't like it. Let us switch to the redefinition aspect of these matters. I used to refer to various ventures into redefining what things meant as the definition wars. What happens when the government modifies and moves the bar on what a terrorist is and what a terrorist act is defined as in the legal code? You see, you may think at first when you hear that to say, yeah, terrorist, we want to put terrorists away. We don't want these terrorists causing upsets in our lives, and we don't want we want terrorism to stop. We don't want terrorists bothering us and hurting us and destroying our property and attacking our country. And if they are involved in a terrorist act, then, we want them punished. We want them punished. We want a ton of bricks to fall on them like the Empire State Building just fell on them. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. I don't like terrorists either, real terrorists. However, let me remind you, when the Patriot Act was first written and passed, it was 2,500 pages. Then it grew into over 10,000 pages. Now, when they first passed this law or legal definition of what terrorist means and what terrorist act means, that may be okay for when they first did it. But what if they start adding on to that and say, well, I'll tell you what, terrorist is now we're going to add more pages to this. Terrorist is now going to mean this, and this. And there'll be things in that list, and you'll see that, and you'll go, you mean they're defining that as a terrorist? And then they'll have terrorist act, and they'll have all kinds of things. That's a terrorist act. You see, I'm telling you, this redefinition of things and moving the bar around like that is a awesome power. It's a dangerous power. And it's an easy way it's easy to subject stuff like that to abuse. What about when the government modifies and moves the bar on what the word hate shall encompass and what constitutes a hate crime? You see, now, originally, or fundamentally you say, well, I think I know what hate means, and I think I know what hate crime means. What if they start moving the bar on the definition of hate? What if they start moving the bar on the definition and application of what's a hate crime? Now you may say, oh, they wouldn't do that. Yes, they would. Yes, they would. You know, you may think that's not a real possibility, but it is a real possibility. And you have to keep an eye on things like that. You have to consider all that while you're really happy about how the government is coming down on bad people. Always think in the back of your mind, yes, they're coming down on bad people now, but can they ever use that and move the bar around and use it against the American people? Can that ever happen? Well, I'm here to tell you that absolutely it can. All right, let's go on. What about when the government modifies and moves the bar on what the word weapon shall mean and what constitutes a dangerous weapon? What kind of world will we have then? Where anything and everything could somehow be used as a weapon can be legally classified or recodified in the law. Let me read that again. Where anything and everything that could somehow be used as a weapon can be legally classified and recodified in the law. Couple that with reclassification of what constitutes a crime and a felony, and then you see where you end up. You won't have your inherent and inalienable rights for long. So you have to be careful about what the word weapon is going to be defined as legally, not weapon, a definition in Webster's dictionary, the legal definition of weapon, the legal definition of what constitutes a dangerous weapon. Now you may think, oh man, that's just so simple. Nobody's going to make anything bad out of that. Well, don't be so sure. Don't be so sure. Let's take that a step further. What happens when the government modifies and moves the bar on what an assault weapon is and what constitutes an assault weapon? There are spec ops people around who can kill you 5 different ways with a fork and spoon. Let me say that again. There are spec ops people around who can kill you 5 different ways with a fork and spoon. So can a fork and spoon be used as a weapon? Can it be used as a dangerous weapon? Yes, it can. Under these conditions, a simple stick or wooden dowel is an assault weapon. Let me read that again. Under these conditions, under these kind of possibilities and conditions, and sometimes realities, because these things actually are happening around the world, where things are being reclassified and redefined, a simple stick may be sharpened on one end, or a wooden dowel is an assault weapon. It won't be long before you won't have any idea of what things mean and what things are. Moreover, you won't be able to know from one moment to the next if you are in violation of some reclassified, recodified concept containing redefined words, phrases, and terms as you try to negotiate your way through a maze of recategorization, wondering whether or not you're in violation of the law. Chances are you will be in violation somewhere, somehow, on an ongoing basis. That's so important, I'm going to read it again. It won't be long before you won't have any idea of what things mean and what things are. Moreover, you won't be able to know from one moment to the next if you are in violation of some reclassified, recodified concept containing redefined words, phrases, and terms as you try to negotiate your way through a maze of recategorization, wondering whether or not you're in violation of the law. Chances are you will be in violation somewhere, somehow, on an ongoing basis. We are building a world where you are no longer innocent until you're proven guilty, but rather, you will exist in a constant state of violation, so that you can be pounced upon at any time, not knowing just exactly where you stand, and you must thank your lucky stars that perhaps the government allows you to proceed in life with some access to unhindered existence. You see, this is where I see this thing going if it continues on its present course. And everybody says, well, yeah, but we've got to trade in some security. We've got to trade in some rights. Trade in some rights so that we can have security. Because we're afraid of terrorists, and we're afraid of this, and we're afraid of that. We're so afraid that we're just ready to hand our rights right on over. You got to rethink that. You really got to rethink that. There are people out there that are pushing that. Maybe they have an idea. Maybe I'm not being fair. I was going to say they have no idea. Maybe they have an idea and they're going ahead with it anyway, you see. But we, the people, didn't create the government so that we could lose all our rights and trade it in for security, because those who trade in their rights for security eventually lose both. Okay, we didn't create the government for that. They're supposed to protect our rights and make sure that we continue to have them. Now, let me talk for a minute. It's not in my notes, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Sometimes they jump up and they say, it's an emergency. We're in a state of emergency, and they'll say they'll try to justify this state of emergency that exists by some explanation or some event that occurred or some media thing that you saw. And okay, I realize, and I'm not so foolish as to say there aren't real emergencies. There are real emergencies. But you know what can happen when they start taking your rights away during an emergency? What can happen is that you can end up in a perpetual state of emergency and you never get your rights back. That's what can happen. Now, in my way of thinking, and I hope in your way of thinking, when there's emergency, a real emergency, and we have to give something up for sake of getting through this emergency, fine, okay. Depending on exactly what we're talking about, I may or may not have an objection. But no continuing state of emergency, and when the emergency is over, we get our rights back. Don't you let that slide. I'm telling you, don't let that slide. None of this, it's a continuing state of emergency, and you're looking around, where? Where is this continuing state of emergency? Well, it exists. Can I know what the continuing state of emergency is? Oh, well, that's classified. That's classified. You can't know that. But we're telling you, just trust us. There's a continuing state of emergency, and you can't have your rights back. That's a problem, my friends, brethren, and fellow Americans. That's a problem. Okay, I'm going to talk about something now that, some may find offensive for me to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. My son reminded me earlier before we started making this recording. He says, you're going to have to talk about it sooner or later anyway, so you might as well go ahead and talk about it this time. And I will, but I don't want you to get the wrong idea about what I'm saying. I want you to know, I want you to remember these words that I now tell you. I, Pastor Mike, am not a hater. I'll say it again. I, Pastor Mike, am not a hater. Okay? Now, let me read what I wrote here. We have already seen in the area of law what sex means. What it originally meant was gender, but now includes sexual orientation. While I will not address these issues directly, I simply say that we are dealing with redefinition and reclassification and all the things we've been talking about. So now, what we mean by sex, when we say you can't be discriminated on by the civil rights on the basis of sex, we now include sexual orientation in that, okay? As I said earlier, the power to redefine, for example, is a far-reaching, life-controlling, and life-altering power. It attempts to and has every potential of succeeding in reshaping the very foundation of human existence out of harmony with basic, inherent, and inalienable rights. Now, you may consider that redefinition through the law a victory And that's understandable for those who view it that way. So there are people out there, and I'm sure, that say, okay, yeah, but we're glad that they did that. We're glad that they had sex mean not only gender, but it now means sexual orientation. And we're glad that happened, and we consider that a victory, and we don't have any problem with it. Okay. But where has the trend of sex-related understanding led us? Has it led to, did it stop with just that, or has it moved on from that? Well, I think everybody realizes it's moved on from that. Okay. We now live in a world where we are no longer able to be certain who is a man or who is a woman. In fact, it is getting so complicated in terms of gender diversity that one literally needs to take a college course to be re-educated on these matters. My friends and brethren, for an older person like me, I'm talking about myself here, who was raised in the relative male-female simplicity, the idea of male-female simplicity, well, I was raised that way. Man was a man, woman was a woman, that's the way I was raised. You can't really get mad at me for the way I was raised like that. It's just the way I was raised. Okay? That's not as easy to adjust to as one might think or expect. Nor should it be necessary to require such adjustment by law. Nor should it be necessary to require such adjustment by law. I want to state here that I don't hate gay people at all. Being a pastor and a believer in the Bible, I do disagree with various alternative lifestyles on a doctrinal level. That does not and should not automatically paint me as a hater. To think so is simply an injustice. I'll read that again. To think so is simply an injustice. Now, in the dynamic that's out there now in society, people are awfully concerned about not offending other people. And I said, well, we shouldn't do this and do that and the other thing because it offends somebody. And when it offends somebody, they actually go farther to say we're offended and we just want them to stop doing that. No, they want a law passed to stop people, hold them legally responsible for this offensive thing they might have said. Well, I'll tell you something. When you paint me as a hater just because I don't agree with you on a doctrinal or principle point, that's offensive. And I'm offended by that because I am not a hater. I can disagree with somebody about something without necessarily becoming a hater. And I want you to consider that, and I want you to give that a little bit of thought. I believe that God is the creator and that his word contains basic truths, so it should be no surprise that I opt to doctrinally stand with God. Should the gay community have the right to require that put me at odds with God in the God that I believe in? Let me read that because I didn't do a very good job. Should the gay community have the right to require that I put myself at odds with the God that I believe in? I don't think they should require that, you see. I don't think they should require that. My relationship with a sovereign God and his jurisdiction is an inherent right. And I'd like you to think about that too. One thing more on that subject. God, being the creator, has a few classification, codification, definition, and categorization rights of his own. I'll read that again. God, being the creator, has a few classification, codification, definition, and categorization rights of his own. And for many, his rights to classify, codify, categorize, and define things trumps that of mankind. All right. I'm going to leave that behind. I think I've said my piece. I hope I've made my point that, I'm not... I hope that you'll do me the courtesy and do me the respect of not considering me a hater just because I don't agree with you on some doctrinal or principle point. I don't think that people who disagree with me on doctrinal or principle points on the other side are necessarily haters, and I think you ought to extend me that same courtesy. Now, let's talk about evolution for a minute and the redefinition of words and what things mean and moving moving around in categories and all that stuff. I wanted to mention, as part of this matter of redefinition, that in the area of evolution, we see that going on as well. For example, the varying definition of what evolution means and what constitutes actual evolution, such as the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. Also, in the area of biogenesis and abiogenesis, what life means and what constitutes life. Clearly, the notion that material chemistry just becomes life over time in a matter plus time equals life model is not anything that can be proven. Just because matter interacts in a chemical or in a chemistry way is a far cry from life by abiogenesis. We are also encountering the changing views on what constitutes good science and what is simply storytelling and scientism relying on professional credentials or academic credentials. I have written about these issues in the past, and I may post those writings again in the future on Facebook. All right, I'm going to move on. I really would like to say more about evolution, but I'm not going to do it because there's a lot to it. I've spent quite a bit of time in that area, researching and studying and doing some writing. Using fees, licenses, and permits as a way to encroach upon inherent and inalienable rights. This can be applied many different ways, but we will use the right of self-protection by the keeping and bearing of arms as an example. First of all, the legal definition of a license. A license is permission to do that which would otherwise, without the license, be illegal. I'm going to read that again. A license is permission to do that which would otherwise, without the license, be illegal. A permit is a variation of the word permission and is just another way of saying license. A fee is a monetary requirement which must be paid in order to do something, like get a license or a permit or receive some type of service, remedy, or approval. Black's Law Dictionary defines it this way. A fee is a charge fixed by law for services of public officers or for use of a privilege under control of the government. When the government establishes a system where, for example, you must have a license or a permit with various and continuing fees required, for each firearm you may possess and bear, or let me see, what am I misreading something here? For each firearm you may possess and bear in order to protect yourself, it is a burden and an encroachment upon your inherent and inalienable rights. It goes even further when, under the terms of a license, permit, or law, such burdensome requirements are imposed as to impact your rights out of reasonable and realistic access and use. So, when there's a license that you get, well, then there are usually terms under that license, kind of like a contract. You have a contract and then there's terms, contractual terms that you must adhere to. Well, under a license, there will be limits and terms and boundaries to what you can do under that license or permit. And you may be you may have burdensome requirements imposed upon you that impact your rights out of reasonable and realistic access and use, such as the requirement that your firearm must be locked up in one place and the ammunition locked up or stored in another place, depending upon the far-reaching requirements imposed, as well as becoming more restrictive over time, and the not expected trend of ever-increasing fees. It amounts to yet another way to deprive you of your rights to self-protection by the keeping and bearing of arms, which, of course, shall not be infringed. Now, we've long since left shall not be infringed behind. I mean, they're well beyond that. It's like, not only did you cross the fence into my property, but you're well into my property and probably into my house and probably in my safe. You know, that's how far we've left shall not be infringed behind. We also have the problem of taxing and regulating your inherent rights out of reach. We were conditioned, I want you to listen carefully to this. We were conditioned when we were very young to seek permission and license. And license, of course, is permission to do that which without the license would be unlawful or not allowed. Some may remember back in grade school when you were given a hall pass to go to the bathroom or some other office or place. Well, we are still being given hall passes in one form or another from birth to death. During the slave era, slaves had to have a written pass to travel from the plantation. We need to understand what it is to be a free people, to go through life with a series of different and varying and differently applied to different things, hall passes for the rest of our lives is not for a free people. It's not for a free people. And we should not have to have hall passes to exercise our inherent and inalienable rights. We should not do that. But we've been conditioned to think that we're supposed to do that. And it started when we were just young. Maybe they don't do that anymore in grade school. I don't know, but they sure did it when I was in grade school. Conclusion statement. Take a drink first. Humanity is well on the road to reforming what God has said things mean and what things are, including establishing their own rules, separate from God, of what constitutes right and wrong, as well as various other important concepts. What do you suppose will happen as mankind continues to redefine, reclassify, recodify, and recategorize whatever they choose, as we have seen happening on an increasing basis? When mankind seizes the authority to reshape fundamental concepts at will, thinking themselves the ultimate authority on what constitutes reality, we are well on our way to our own self-destruction. Such problems only become worse if we establish a system of government where we, by law, bind everyone to a religious model of existence, practice, and behavior, or where we establish a system of government where we, by law, bind everyone to a non-religious model of existence, practice, and behavior, such as an unbiblical model of existence. Obviously, where we strive to bind everyone to one worldview or the other, it is by its very nature problematic. I have for years now been working on a solution to the problem we find ourselves in. I have carefully contemplated a bifurcated social order where two opposing worldviews can exist without being legally bound to the fundamentally and doctrinally demanding requirements of the other. But that is not the subject of this study and instruction, and will not be further addressed here or now. Now, what I want to talk about that just a little bit. Here is the problem that we're dealing with. The way things stand right now, the people on the liberal and left side are saying, no, we don't want a bunch of laws that impose this religious notion of how to live and what the boundaries are of what you can't do according to the Bible. We don't want that applied to everybody. Because if it applies to everybody, there's a whole bunch of people there that don't even believe in God. Why should we be bound by those rules that are set out in Scripture? That's their position. Then you look at the other side, and the people who do believe in God and say, well, God requires certain things of us. For one thing, we don't agree with abortion, and we don't agree with different things. I'm not going to go through them all. You kind of have a good idea what they are. And they're going to say, why should we be bound by all of this secular and non-religious lifestyle that people want to live? and make it all binding upon us. Make it all binding upon us. You see, now you may think to yourself, well, yeah, the one side wants it to go one way, and the other side wants it all to go in it, and it's got to apply to everybody. Well, that's the very problem that we have. That's the very problem that we have. I think that the answer lies in not having it apply to everybody the same way. And the way the law is now, that's really not possible because of the model of law that we now follow. It appears like that we can't have a system where the law doesn't apply equally to everybody all the same way. Well, then you're going to have strife on what the law is going to be, because neither side's going to be happy. For example, I do not want to perform same-sex marriages. I don't mind if somebody else performs same-sex marriages. That's not something that I would even do anything about. But when you require me to perform them and put me in violation of doctrine that I believe in the Bible, then I feel that I shouldn't have to do that. You see, you on the other side feel that you shouldn't have to be bound by these religious things that I might believe in. Well, I kind of agree with you. I kind of agree that this all-encompassing application of the law, because then it's got to, where's the bar going to end? Where's it going to land? Is it going to be towards the religious? Is it going to be towards the secular and atheistic and leftist view of things? Where is it going to end? Well, it's not going to work out very well, because I'm telling you, I know people that are not going to want to live the way that the non-religious people want to live, and vice versa. We have to find a solution, people. We have to find a solution. We have to be mature and big enough to find a solution to this. And I've tried to work on that. This all-encompassing thing is something that is going to cause us problems in the future. And I hope that you too will think about it and you go, yeah, I think Pastor Mike's got a point. How is this supposed to work? Either everybody's got to become like the non-believers, or everybody's got to become like the believers. Well, that's not going to work. That's not really going to work. So we have to look for the solutions elsewhere. Now, I want to say this much. I do believe that if, when the time comes, for those of us who believe in God, when the time comes, and this is, of course, over my pay grade, if God is God, and God is the creator, and God is really in charge over man, then there will be a day of reckoning when God does whatever he's going to do. But of course, that's above my pay grade. And I would like you to understand, yes, I stand with God. Yes, I believe in the scriptures, and yes, I believe God is real, and yes, I believe there's going to be a day of reckoning. But in the meantime, I believe that we may be able to have some sort of a bifurcated system where people who don't want to be bound by religion don't have to be, and the religious people who don't want to be bound by all kinds of practices that aren't in keeping and in harmony with what we believe in don't have to be bound by that. All right, maybe I spent too much time on that. I don't know. I just wanted you to think about it. I wanted you to think about solutions that maybe we could have. Okay, do you have any questions on anything?
I don't, but I have a couple of comments if you
Okay.
mind. Going back to the reclassification, recodification,
You got to speak up because...
Sorry, going back to the conversation in the beginning about reclassification, recodification stuff.
Uh-huh.
I know personally of two cases that might give an interesting example to how things changed. One is a case where, for example, taking your gun rights away.
Uh-huh.
For a felony, it's an absolute. They take your gun rights away.
Yeah.
Okay. But they also take gun rights away for misdemeanors of violent crimes, including domestic violence.
Mhm.
Well, they have more and more. They haven't, to a large extent, toyed with felonies, but they have, to a larger extent, toyed with misdemeanors and domestic violence. For example, I know of a case where a man got in an argument with his wife because she was cheating on him and she was talking to her boyfriend. And he snatched the phone out of her. She goes, they got in a kind of an argument that was not violent or anything. It was no threatening or anything going on his part.
No weapons involved.
No weapons involved, no violence involved. He never struck her, never laid a hand on her. He never threatened her. But she said, I'm going to call my boyfriend. And he snatched the phone out of her hand and said, no, you're not. He got convicted of domestic violence and his gun rights were taken away for the entire United States forever, for the rest of his life.
For grabbing the phone out of her hand.
For grabbing the phone out of her hand because he got convicted of a domestic violence.
Violence conviction.
Conviction.
For grabbing the phone.
For grabbing the phone.
And he lost his gun rights forever.
Forever, yeah.
Okay. So in other words, what my son is saying here, he says they're not just going by felonies, they're lowering it down into the misdemeanor range. And when they lower it down into the misdemeanor range, there are all kinds of places in the misdemeanor range where you can also lose your right to keep and bear arms and lose your right of self-protection in the misdemeanor range. So there, it doesn't surprise me that this has happened. Once you open the door, once you open Pandora's box and say the government now has the power to take your gun rights away forever, your right to keep and bear arms and your right to self-protection forever, by the keeping and bearing of arms. Okay, you probably can use a stick until they call that an assault stick. But anyway, the point is, forever. Once you open the door, now they just have to move the bar on things, on what they can say, then we're going to use this. We're going to use this misdemeanor and that misdemeanor and this and that to take your gun rights away. And that's another thing that you need to think about when you're going through this kind of an instruction and this kind of a scrutiny on what we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that would be a good example of how they're changing it. Another one is someone I know personally many years ago wrote a couple of bad checks. And the person who did this was 19 years old at the time. And I agree it was stupid and I agree it was wrong and they should be in trouble.
Okay.
However, what they did is because they wrote more than one bad check and over a certain dollar amount, and it wasn't that high, but it was over a certain dollar amount, it was automatically classified as a felony. And that person also, to this day, has got their gun rights taken away forever.
Okay, let me repeat this. A 19-year-old wrote a couple of bad checks in whatever amount, we don't know the exact amount, and it was classified as a felony, and he lost his gun rights forever. It was a she.
Yes.
She lost her gun rights forever on writing a bad check.
A couple of bad checks, yeah.
Okay.
Now, see, there's a perfect example of, let's say if they say, well, you write 3 bad checks over $500, it's a felony. Well, then they can say, well, if you write 2 bad checks over $200, it's a felony.
Yeah.
Then they could say, if you write one bad check over $100, it's a felony.
Right. So in other words, you can just move the bar.
Start toying with it.
You see, it's kind of like the sliding scale kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Sliding scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to warn everybody, when they start being able to do this. When we open the door to let unconstitutional evidence convict people, when we open the door to let our gun rights be taken away, our inherent and inalienable rights taken away, even after we've paid our debt to society, even after, maybe you are convicted of a crime and you paid your debt to society, and then to say you're forever barred from being able to keep and bear arms to protect yourself, that's really not something they should be able to do. And what really troubles me is that when the American people, not knowing the full scope, or even worse, they know the full scope, but then they still agree to have that done, that the American people would agree to something like that. Because if they can do it to those people, they can do it to any of us. That's what we have to understand. That's what we have to be clear about. You see, we're going to have to do something to make sure that we hang on to our inherent and inalienable rights. And you know I'm working on that. Those of you who have been following my videos, those of you who have been reading what I've been writing, know that I'm working on that. And over time, I'm going to share some of these remedies that I've used for myself. You know, I'm going to share those with you so that you can see a different way of looking at things, because that's what it's going to take. The people are sovereign, and we have to act like sovereign people, and we have to think through before we just hand our rights away to other people who are no different than we are. We were all created equal, and they don't have any more rights than you do. And when a group of people who don't have any more rights than you do start doing these things, and if we're silly enough to agree to it, and without thinking it all the way through and go, you know, well, as long as they're not doing it to me, I don't care. Well, you better care. You better care. Is there anything else?
I had a couple other comments if you...
Okay.
Okay. One of them is that when you talked about changing the definition of a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
In London, for example, there was a recent case where a guy had got a... what do you call it? A bayonet. An old, like it was like an old bayonet. I think he got it from an uncle or a grandfather or something that was in World War II.
A bayonet.
You know, he was transferring it to his house, and for whatever reason, he got detained by law enforcement there, and they said he had a weapon of war, and you know, and in Western Europe and Great Britain, they're more and more and more. They're openly calling, like if you have a knife, a weapon of war.
A weapon of war.
Even a folding pocket knife is a weapon of war. And just the possession of it alone is enough to...
Where did this bayonet thing happen? Where does...
In London.
In London, okay.
Yeah. And, also, like in Australia, for example, there they go significantly further than that. If you have a screwdriver on your person that you can't explain why you've got it, they consider that a weapon that you're not lawfully authorized to have, and you can go to jail for it, even though you may not have been using it as a weapon.
So you have to explain why you have a screwdriver.
Yeah, they've reached the point at which if you're in possession of something that they don't like, such as a screwdriver, and you can't explain why you've got it, or they're not satisfied with your explanation. And of course in Australia...
So you don't even have to be found committing a crime or anything like that. It's just that it could be used as a weapon.
Yeah, possession itself of a tool like a screwdriver can be considered a crime if they're not satisfied with your explanation of why you had the screwdriver, say, in your vehicle. Also, obviously in Australia, people already know possession of things like pepper spray, which is a non-lethal, defensive tool, is a crime. Whether you used it or not, possession alone is a crime.
Yeah.
And it is a mistake to assume that what's going on in Western Europe and Australia cannot and will not be moved here.
Oh no, I think the trend is that what's going on in Australia and in Europe and in England could very easily happen here. And I think that I want to tell people, you know, the way things are over there in Australia, man, it's really advanced. They took their guns away, and now they've got all kinds of strange laws over there. One guy, I'll just relate this story to you real quick. One guy built a crossbow. It's a homemade crossbow, and apparently that's illegal in Australia. But anyway, he made this crossbow. He never used it. It was hanging on the wall in his house, and they found out that he had it, and he was prosecuted for it, and he had to turn the crossbow over, you know, and that's a crossbow. There's no end to this thing. There's no end to this thing if we don't start having some unity among the people to try to put a stop to this. Now I can help you, you know, show you what I'm trying to do. I can teach you some of the doctrines that I know so that you can maybe think about what I'm talking about. What I'm really trying to do is to get you to see things from a different angle, to get you to see things from another perspective, so that you can not go off and say, you know, yes, I'd like to just see them put criminals away any way they can. It doesn't matter to me, constitutional, not constitutional, fair, unfair. I just want them to make the thing go away. Well, I got news for you. When you give them the power to make things go away, they can make your rights and inherent and inalienable rights go away too, you see. That's what you're agreeing to in the long run. And you have to think about that. There has to be some sanity to this. Otherwise, we're not going to be any better off than some of these other people we hear about that are going through these abuses of their inherent and inalienable rights. And we'll be there too. So, with that, is that it? Do we have anything
Just
else?
one more
Just
comment.
one more thing.
In your statements on the continued state of emergency.
Right. Continued state of emergency.
You know, in the past just couple of years, I have seen on multiple occasions heads of law enforcement agencies, heads of governmental law enforcement and other governmental agencies, and politicians repeatedly speak about the continued state of emergency we're in this country right now with the war on terror.
So they're just having, this is a state of emergency that never ends,
Yeah,
basically.
we're seeing terrorists in our soup.
Yeah.
And the war on terror is ongoing, and so we're in a forever state of emergency because of the war on terror.
Do you think that there's any validity to what they're saying at all that you can pick out somewhere?
I do think that there are some real dangers. I
Right.
think it's been completely overblown by different people for different reasons. Some are using it as a means of control, but some genuinely believe that you know, they're just hysterical. You know, as kind of like as George Orwell wrote in 1984, the main character Winston Smith says we're in a constant state of hysteria. You know, it's a sort of diabolical schemes designed to keep people in a constant state of hysteria so they can't think right. And I think we're seeing some of that. People are kind of in this constant state of hysteria.
Okay. Well, as I warned, we got to be careful about these constant state of never-ending emergencies, you know. Let me close with this thought before I read the closing statement. And that is this. When we do have hard times that come upon us and there's danger, and there's a heightened atmosphere of danger, I want to remind everybody that you can just as easily argue that the people should be more able to protect themselves under those conditions than they would when things are peaceful. They should have the right to protect themselves by the keeping bearer of arms in either case. But that's not the time to take their weapons away. That's the time that they should be more able to protect themselves because there is danger. It's not the time to disarm us. I want you to think about that one too. I really do. I've said it before and I'm saying it again now. Closing statement. This has been another Investment in Truth Review instructional video by Pastor Mike Benjamins Jr. of the Remnant Church in Southern Oregon, USA. It has been a privilege and an honor to be able to instruct you and talk about you on so important as, talk not about you, but talk to you about this kind of subject matter. Thank you for your attention, your interest, your consideration, and your support. This is Pastor Mike saying take care and, as applicable, God bless.